Next we have a keynote. Joe Longhurst.
While Joe sets up, I just wanted to say a little bit about her work. As you can see from the... You guys can stay there. You don't have to move. Oh, you need water. Oh. Sadly, there's no coffee. That's the real reason we're keeping you in here. There'll be coffee in a mo. You can read in the bio all the shows that Jo has done, but I just wanted to add that her compelling work was just recognized, and she's so modest that she didn't actually put this in here. She just won she put in the Grange Prize photography and so on in Toronto, but what she didn't mention was that she was a resident at the gallery there for, 6 months or something, or 3 months?
Oh, 8 weeks.
8 weeks. And during that time, she was both dealing with her work and also on display. And I thought that that was quite interesting in terms of how someone whose work primarily is through the camera, how this whole question of looking gets established. And I'm sure that she's going to get into that now. So thank you, Jo.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, Johnny, thank you so much for inviting me to take part in this wonderfully diverse discussion. When you did invite me, at first I was a little unsure what I might contribute today, because the conference sets out to explore the many transformations brought about by the digital age. And I do, of course, use digital technologies as part of my making process, but I have a love-hate relationship with them. I love the possibilities for research, the access to information opened up by digital communications, the way I can hunt down materials and processes that might previously have remained unknown to me. But with the rise of digital, there's an inevitable loss of certain analogue materials and equipment, which can't be replicated in the digital realm. And despite the wide audience it brings, I hate the internet as a tool for viewing my work. Photography is ubiquitous, and this is its strength, but not all photographs operate in the same way. And for some, a digital platform can be unhelpful. There's something about an on-screen photograph, as opposed to an on-screen photograph of a sculpture or a painting, that can be somehow reductive. People often tend to think they know my work once they've seen a photograph online, but it's very hard to convey the physicality of a piece this way. So, sorry, I should have... My work might be broadly described as an exploration of perfection. I'm interested in how ideas of perfection shape our social and political systems, and how these in turn shape our personal experiences and our sense of self. I work with photography, video, performance, and installation. The physicality of my work is important. I pay great attention to the materials I use, the particular qualities in my prints, and the way they're mounted or framed, grouped, and installed, whether in a gallery space or elsewhere. And although chance plays a part in my creative process, when it comes to production, I'm a control freak. And this doesn't sit well with the digital dissemination of my work. So in this talk, I'm going to share with you some of my thinking and making processes, drawing predominantly from my new work, Other Spaces. And this is the cover of the book, which is also outside. And I'm not going to go into that today, but there's other ways of showing the work here as well. So this project evolved from my previous body of work, The Refusal, a study of the British show whippet with a focus on conventions of portraiture, perfect body form, and the contradictory, controlling, loving relationship between human and dog. I hope I'm not going to disappoint, but there's not time to go into this project today. But through the making of this work, I explore how we have contributed to the shaping of human identity through our obsession with photography, and how not just the photograph, but also our bodies and minds have changed with each new wave of technological possibility. I believe new and emerging technologies can be a catalyst for new ways of thinking, but they're also sometimes used to disguise old ways of thinking. For example, genomics, the theory and practice of genetic manipulation, has much in common with the discredited practice of eugenics, which I explore through these eugenic breeding processes of show whippet breeders. And the rise of the contemporary debate about photographic truth that we've just been discussing now, brought to the fore by digital imagery, is equally relevant to historic analogue photographs. So in other spaces, I switch my inquiry from the ideal body to the perfect performance, exploring the physical and emotional experiences of elite gymnasts in training and competition. And you see here not a photograph, but a performance still taken at Mostyn at Llandudno. Although I have a leaning towards lens-based media, I don't come to a project with a fixed idea of how it should be made. I work with people who are passionate about what they do and whose specialisms are often rooted in tradition or popular culture. As part of my working process, I immerse myself in their worlds and take inspiration directly from these experiences. My desire is always to make my work in the most direct and appropriate way to convey or provoke certain ideas or emotions. In the course of making my photographic work, I've encountered many unwritten rules and expectations, received ideas of how things should be done, frustrations over how it is thought an image ought to be made and reproduced, how it should be framed, consumed, and sometimes made available, both as a physical object and online. As a result, despite the fairly classic aesthetics of my work, it could be said that my subject matter now also includes the photograph and the conventions and traditions of photographic practice, many of which, interestingly, also have an uneasy alliance with ideas of perfection. As in my work with dogs, my work with gymnasts involves performance, spectacle, competition, and ideas of excellence. It also stems from a personal passion. I work from a position of detachment, but with the physical and emotional knowledge of a sport I once actively participated in. So, Other Spaces is not a documentary or an attempt at making a literal work about gymnastics. In fact, for me, it's important to try and locate this work somewhere outside of gymnastics. It is, of course, about gymnastics, but I want to open it up to make it about more than a sporting discipline. My title, Other Spaces, is simple, open, and hints at this. At the time, I was thinking of, the public and the private, the physical and the psychological, analogue and digital, terrestrial and celestial, all different kinds of spaces. It also references the title of a Foucault text, which elaborates on the social significance of utopias and heterotopias. The heterotopia, a term elaborated by Foucault to describe real, culturally determined places of otherness, which have more layers of meaning or relationships to other places than initially meets the eye. So gymnastics has a long social and political history, and one entwined with an idea of aesthetic perfection. But in this project, I concern myself specifically with the idea of technical perfection, even though the training required to develop innate talent also has a perfecting impact on the physical body of the gymnast. So A to Z, which you see here, is the establishing piece of the project. It's installed here at the National Media Museum in Bradford, and this was the original version made in 2008. It's small blocks of appropriated photographs on MDF, very functional, each 3 inches wide, so small blocks clustered together. And the work includes the basic components of a routine, the pike, the tuck, the straddle, the layout, etc., as well as key moves named after the gymnasts who invented them. The making of this first piece using appropriated photographs allowed me to get inside the head of the professional sports photographer. It includes hundreds of photographs made over decades. It's an exploration of the discipline of gymnastics, but also a meditation on the changing technologies of photography. Going through thousands of images, I found certain recurring shots, certain poses privileged over others, captured photographically time and time again. Working with these images, it was striking to see how the most successful gymnasts also become representatives of ideologies and nations, reflecting changing world political and economic powers. The photographs were drawn from a variety of commercial, professional, and museum archives. I won't reference them all now, but also contemporary photographers, including Volker Minkus, the official photographer to the International Gymnastics Federation, and Sing Lo, who was a freelance enthusiast I found on the internet, originally a fashion photographer, but he became obsessed with gymnasts. Many of these images I found through eBay or from online digital archives. So these are just a couple of the eBay purchases from Progress Publishing, which was the obviously now defunct propaganda arm of the Soviet Union. So here I'm just showing you a couple of slides of some of the clusters and how I worked on them digitally on my computer. So this is the first piece I made. I didn't actually see it realised till I was installing it at the museum. So here in the first cluster, the women's floor work, I grouped dance poses, highlighting the trace of similar coquettish gestures across time and cultures. The shape of the gymnast's body transforms from soft, rounded figures of the 30s to the hard, muscular, toned contemporary physiques. And the photographic technologies are also seen to evolve over time. So you can see early grainy black and white analogue prints, 70s Kodachrome colours, all these photographers at the time used Leicas, and then thousands and thousands of contemporary digital images that I waded through, mainly made with Nikon and Canon digital cameras. What's most apparent in this initial cluster is the way it highlights attitudes to gender within the discipline. For female gymnasts, there appears to be an additional tacit requirement to those laid out in the judging criteria to make the difficult appear both glamorous and effortless. Whereas the female gymnast routines are expected to display grace and fluidity, disguising the power and control needed to execute them, the specific demands of the apparatus in the male competition often emphasise a gymnast's strength and control. So here we have the cluster for the Azarian cross, named after the Soviet Albert Azarian's signature move on the rings, first performed in the early 1950s. So I had all these hundreds of images, how to make a work from them. I decided to cluster them, but I also included particular individuals that interested me. So gymnasts from all eras and nations are included, arranged between the first photograph for the installation, which is this one, an expressive shot of the glamorous Russian Svetlana Korkina. I included her because she was quite a maverick, an acknowledged diva of the discipline throughout the late 1990s and early 21st century. While still competing, she posed naked for Playboy, very unlike the old Soviet team who were always kind of working for the regime. She came out of gymnastics, got a PhD, became an elected member of United Russia and is now the deputy of Putin's Youth Commissariat. She even announced last year her decision to stand as a candidate in the recent Russian presidential elections, although this didn't materialise in the end. So she is my first block. The final 215th block is this image of the Aryan Alfred Schwarzmann, Hitler's gold medal winning Luftwaffe pilot, holding a classic pose on the floor. So I've included a few shots here to give you a sense of the pacing of the installation. The clusters highlight the repetition and evolution of moves over time. I include the same move, this one's the Comaneci Salto, after Nadia Comaneci, evolving with different bodies and different histories. And unlike Muybridge's celebrated study of body movement, captured by a series of cameras triggered sequentially to reveal what at the time the eye couldn't see, I chose to fragment a moment over a very different timescale, presenting a depiction of a moment in time over decades rather than seconds. Some clusters contain more contemporary photographs than others. This one, the Yurchenko vault, was only invented in the 80s after the Soviet gymnast Natalia Yurchenko. We have the Sukahara. This is actually towards the end of the installation where you can see Schwarzmann at the end. And while each image evokes its own particular response, I'm sure very different depending on who you are looking at the work, whether you know gymnastics or whether you're actually just looking at it as a meditation on the human physique and the human capacity for movement. For me, this last image of Schwarzmann brings to mind Olympia, Leni Riefenstahl's seductive propaganda film shot at the 1936 Berlin Olympics, an infamous film in the history of aesthetics in which sport, politics and art are inseparable. For my solo show at Mostyn, which was this summer, I made a second version of A to Z in Perspex block. It looks quite different, despite being the same work. It looks quite different and operates slightly differently. There's an extra visual dimension as you move through. There's almost a doubling of the image. And I did this to experiment with it, but also to provide a material link with the other new works. So, to sum up A to Z, the name and formal installation of this work hint at an order or system, but one that fails to fully materialise in the artwork. The presentation of immaculate photographs of famous gymnasts performing key moves is undermined by a fractured repetition of similar photographs taken over many decades, which place the gymnasts and photographers within a particular cultural and political context. In addition to reworking the A to Z, I also worked with original photographic source material, sketches and studies I made as visiting artist at Heathrow Gymnastics Club, Gemini Gymnastics in Oshawa this autumn, and the World Artistic Gymnastics Championships. It may be apparent by now, but I'm interested in systems and order. I'm going to run through some of my influences for this particular project. So here we have the perfect solids. These geometric forms were originally thought to be the building blocks of the universe. The Platonic solids were said to represent fire, earth, water, air, and the whole perfect universe. Leonardo da Vinci's original illustrations of open-faced solids for the Divine Proportions, published by Luca Pacioli in 1509, inspired Kepler's 1596 model of the universe, believed to be formed from nesting Platonic solids. I like that thought. But also the constructivists. So here on the right, Rodchenko's construction number 126, 1920-21. Rodchenko and Lubov Popova, constructivist artists whose revolutionary work of the 1920s also drew from geometry, experimenting with aesthetic forms appropriate for the construction of a new utopian society. So the constructivists turned away from painting to make sculptural works and practical objects. They saw their experimental and non-objective painting as a laboratory for theory and practice. They worked on the expulsion of composition from painting. For them, composition equated to individual expression, instead launching painterly construction based on connected geometric shapes and an intellectual and more collective approach. They also used the available materials of the time. So this image here is very important. It's a photograph taken by Rodchenko of Popova's studio. I think probably at the time of her death, because she died very young, and they shared a studio. But coincidentally, it shows this wooden maquette, which I've not seen anywhere else, but it's obviously a tool she used for the making of her drawings and sketches and paintings. So here's one of her paintings here. They proposed that they'd use available materials at the time, so here, plywood. They also had this kind of optimism of the kind of early revolutionary days. So the colours, this is pure red colour, pure yellow colour, pure blue colour. Blue now being black because the pigment has faded. But there was some kind of purity of intention, something symbolic of this new order. And then Tatlin's Tower, a utopian project to encourage mass actions in a transformed communist city. The glass and steel towers intended to house the operations of the Comintern on 3 levels, each with a geometric revolving form, each one revolving at a different speed. This was architecture to interact with the flow of the masses. He proposed to replace urban estrangement with an internally organised form of the collective everyday. It never got made because Lenin didn't like it, but it's kind of survived. It's much theorised and much referenced in contemporary art. And then this photograph, I came across at the Tate exhibition a few years ago, the Francis Bacon exhibition, where they had one whole gallery devoted to everything found in his studio when he died. hundreds of photographs, quite fascinating. There was also lots of Muybridge, which you can just see from the catalogue there. He always claimed he didn't use photographs. It was that time when artists, it was almost a dirty word to be seen to be taking inspiration from photographs. But this particular one struck a chord with me. It's called Lichtum, which means Cathedral of Light, and it's party rally in Nuremberg in 1937. And there was something about the potent visual identity of the Third Reich embodied in this photograph, and which Riefenstahl, for example, then used this kind of visual language in her propaganda film Triumph of the Will. But Bacon drew on this image for the composition of many of his incarcerated popes and nudes and wrestlers and figures in the grass. And these are works that I've always had a great, had some affinity with. And there's something about them, and actually understanding where these lines came from is quite interesting. When I started working with the gymnasts at Heathrow, I was working in very strange, difficult photographic conditions in the gym, and I somehow thought I might take images and then work in post-production on them, maybe looking at kind of geometric forms. But when I kind of was going through some of my kind of things I really loved, I came across these images and thought, can't do that, it's just so already been done and so amazingly. So instead what I eventually did was I took one of my images and actually installed it. This is actually, the image is 3.66 meters wide, and this is within the gallery space at Mostyn. It's the small gallery, but it's reasonably big. And I used the gallery walls and ceiling as a geometric framing device. So I'm going to give you a very quick visual tour of the exhibition to kind of locate the works. Here is Pinnacle and part of the A to Z. The Space Force constructions, the final Space Force construction and Peak. Pinnacle and Peak, and then in this room, the darkened room, is where we just were with the piece, which is called Suspension. Suspension 1. So this is a study I shot in training. It was actually shot very early on in my residency there, and there was something about it that really just kind of stuck with me. I cropped the shot quite brutally because I wanted to have that sense of this captured moment, but I think there's something about the fragmented state of being that I was looking to explore. The experience of being in one's physical body and pushing it to the limit. The gymnast, when I photographed her, was in the middle of a highly fast-spinning, twisting somersault, and yet she has this almost inscrutable look. I think she looks remarkably calm, but other people think she looks really concerned. And I like that kind of enigmatic quality that, you can bring something to it and not be so clear what's going on. It's actually made as a 3-panel wallpaper, vinyl wallpaper installation. At the time of making it, I was visiting Heathrow on a regular basis and trying to acclimatise to working with the Nikon D3 for the first time. At that time, it was the state-of-the-art camera for capturing fast-moving action in low light. But despite this pedigree, it was completely pushed to the limit by the poor mixed lighting conditions of the gym. So initially disgruntled by the noisy quality of the results and the weird, dirty colours produced working at such low light levels, I then decided to embrace these qualities in my work. So this gives you, that's actually slightly larger than life size, but it gives you an idea of if you were standing in the room, you were really assaulted just by the coloured particles broken up within the image. So it's a suspension of light and coloured particles mirroring the suspension of the bodily action. And when I was thinking about these images, this fragmentation and the weird colours brought to mind the Hubble images of far-off galaxies shot by sophisticated space imaging technology and the unnatural colours introduced by the NASA scientists. In this book, I've worked with that a little bit in a way that I can't really show you on scene, so have a look. The various clusters of clouds of gas and dust pictured by Hubble, the debris of old exploding stars, and the gathering together of latent energy in the star-forming regions. are inspiring another work where chalk dust, synonymous with the practice of gymnastics, becomes the elemental focus. This was originally a commission for the opening of the National Media Museum, but that has now gone by the wayside, so I'm still to make this. But the plan was to create an immersive experience in a dark chamber, choreographing directional light, raw sound, and gymnast chalk. This came about while I was at Heathrow one summer morning, and there was one natural light window, and the Heathrow gym was very close to one of the runways. And it was a summer's day, so the doors were open, and planes happened to be landing overhead that day. The sound coming in was just like this really elemental roar, nothing like you hear when you're at an airport. And at the same time, the girls were warming up by spinning multiple somersaults off a trampoline into a pit. And every time they landed, these kind of puffs of chalk would come up, and then the light would twinkle through it, and it was quite amazing. So they were really, their energy was really fast, but as they became still, this other energy went up. And of course I filmed it all thinking, this is fantastic, I'm going to make a great piece of work. And then I got it home and it was kind of, it didn't really do what I remembered, the experience. So I want to try and recreate that experience. This is the caption for this image reads, "These dense knots of cosmic dust and gas are absorbing light in the centre of the nearby emission nebula and star-forming region NGC 281. If Bock globules can capture enough mass, they may create stars in their cores. Others, including perhaps these, will just dissipate over time." And this is the kind of language that NASA and NASA scientists use. And these are great images because they very generously upload everything onto their website and allow it to be used copyright-free as long as you credit them. And I'm actually making an artist book for the gymnasts, Heathrow and other star-forming regions, incorporating this strange language and some of the imagery from the NASA credits. So rather than just crediting them, I'm taking each description. It's a reversible hardback pocket book, so there's no front or back, and this is just a screen grab of kind of the overall plan to give you an idea. I don't have it with me. But it incorporates portraits of the Heathrow elite squad sandwiched between these NASA images and texts. And the book is wrapped in a dust jacket depicting Hubble's mosaic of galaxies, which again is something that's quite fascinating. The galaxies, this is the caption, "The galaxies in this mosaic are arranged according to the well-established system developed by American astronomer Edwin Hubble in the 1920s. It goes on to talk about different shaped galaxies, lens-shaped galaxies, pinwheel-shaped arms. There was something kind of that really had a relationship to what was going on with me and the gymnasts. And it finally ends with, "Many of these have since disappeared through possibly a variety of processes, merger disruption and fading." So the contemporary gymnasts at Heathrow are conditioned to experience their discipline through the eyes of sports photographers or parents or friends aping a similar style. And I'm very familiar with these, having poured over thousands of them in the contemporary archives while making A to Z. Shot at the perfect moment, arms and legs extended, the peak of a move, the face calm, smiling even, a look of total mastery, control, elegance and clean lines. But these shots have been made time and time again. And in my work, I try to get beneath the surface to see if I can capture a little of how it feels, the effort required, the doubts, the determination, all the ugly little bits that lead to the perfect moments. In particular, I was thinking in suspension, the hand going up, the ugly hand, the coach hated it. There was something about that hand being out of line that really offended him. But for me, that hand was the hook that made the image interesting and everything revolved around. So I'm interested in the bits they perform night after night in the gym to enable a future performance, and they're not conditioned to seeing this part. So through this book and later on the performance interventions, I try to suggest a different way of thinking about their practice and their disappointment with my photographs. They didn't like them. My text. So this is one of the portraits. The gymnasts in this album are all members of Heathrow Gymnastics Club Elite Squad. I tried to mimic the language of NASA. The images depict various peak positions the gymnasts are required to adopt in training and competition, and transitional moments of introspection before public presentation. So it goes on a little bit like that. Some gymnasts, we talk about all the many competitions they were involved in, including the Olympics and the World Championships. Some gymnasts shone, others left the squad unable to maintain the rigorous regime. And as an extension of this work, this is just a visual for a show I have in Sherbrooke in Quebec in August. And it's a 5-channel video installation. And I made this in Oshawa as part of my residency as an extension of these portraits. I worked with them. I one by one took the girls into the studio. They didn't know what was coming, and then talked them into the position of actually being in a competition, waiting for the previous gymnast score to come up, and then obviously having to present to the judges and to, in this case, to do their vault. And it's actually a very tense time because you can wait for ages for the score to come up, but you only have 30 seconds after that, otherwise you're disqualified. And sometimes even in the Olympics, you know, previous champions get disqualified because they haven't gone in time or they've forgotten to do the kind of presentation. So I'm going to see if it works. Just a very brief slice of it here for you. But essentially they're 5 separate videos looped. So the combination is a very simple piece, but there's an infinite combination between them. In this pared-down video work, 5 adolescents hover like nervy thoroughbreds in the starting blocks. As the gymnasts prepare for action, their disciplined minds and bodies are presented to camera, revealing moments of slippage between private introspection and public display. The installation loops and stutters in continually changing combinations, evoking both the anticipation of competitive action and the arduous training regime of the gymnast. I was particularly interested in this kind of the duration. They train for years and years on end, and they train every night of the week, and they're young, and it's kind of hard work, and all we ever see is the kind of that perfect 3 minutes, or not perfect if they don't get it right. So I wanted something to acknowledge the long duration of their training, but also the fact that they're a member of an extremely disciplined team, and there are strict rules that they have to kind of conform to. They do a kind of fabulous presentation, and I thought about including that, but I felt it was a little bit too kind of Hitler-esque, and I felt it kind of didn't maybe need to be in there. So, moving on. Pinnacle, this is a 3.5 metre high installation of 11 tessellating photographs in powder grey metal frames. In this, I'm referencing the idealism and aesthetics of early Soviet propaganda, but also the nationalistic mountaineering films of Leni Riefenstahl. And I don't know if you can see on the PowerPoint, which is also not one of my favourite ways for people to see my work, but I selected images where the legs had bandages, flesh-coloured bandages or spray-on skin, and the images are either slightly blurred through movement or out of focus. So something about the images themselves almost disintegrated despite being large C-type prints in kind of beautiful frames. That's it. So these images shot at the World Artistic Gymnastics Championships would most likely be rejected, which these days means deleted, leaving no record, by professionals on both sides, so the gymnasts and photographers alike, mainly for displaying an unacceptable failure of technique and physique. This despite being made possible only by the use of a state-of-the-art digital camera and the presence of the world's very best gymnasts in competition. This was the vault finals. This is called Peak, a counterpoint to Pinnacle, and it's a very simple portrait. The quality and size of image reveals the exceptional physique of a 14-year-old girl. This image I shot on film, and it's displayed life-size. It's quite an important image because it has a relationship to the portrait of the white dog, which is the signature work for the refusal. But the gymnast, unlike the dog, is compliant. Coming back to the performance still that I showed at the beginning of the talk, this was the opening night at Mostyn in Llandudno, and later on I did something similar with the Welsh national squad in Cardiff, where I gave them very strict instructions. And throughout the opening, each of these gymnasts was given one particular warm-up move and asked to perform it incredibly slowly but as perfectly as they could, 10 times, and then the next one took over. So almost like an automata, they slowly performed these while people walked around and drank and did whatever. Unfortunately, I haven't got photographs of that because everyone got their cameras out and started kind of looking at them, and it was fine, but it kind of, in Cardiff I didn't let people take photographs, not because I care about people photographing my work, but I wanted them to experience the work, not to get the camera out and just take photographs of the work. And they found this really interesting and very different to performing in competition. So these are my own Space Force constructions, a combination of photograph and sculptural structure. And here I was interested in fusing the visual language of the constructivists, who believed in the sublimation of individual expression for the greater good of the masses, with a more expressionistic style to try and expose the effort and experiences of individual athletes as they perform within these tightly prescribed rules and conventions. So this is my initial layouts. This is Space Force Construction number 1, the image plate, United States of America. And I'm interested in the moment of release, the existential experience of mind and body as a gymnast launches herself into the void of the arena. This is Space Force Construction number 3, India. And I deliberately selected moments in time that would not normally be valued again by the sports photographers. And this is number 2, China. So although the images are focused, unlike the legs one, I've deliberately chosen images that obscure the detail of the face. So I'm interested in individuals, but not in the individual celebrity, because these are all like world-class gymnasts. These are my straw constructions, a handcrafted process based on a children's book that describes how to make perfect solids out of drinking straws and paper clips. It produced rather mutant geometries, which I then translated into these structures of powder-coated aluminium section. I hope you might have recognised that these colours of the structures pick out not just the gymnast leotards, but also, by happy coincidence, Mira Rodchenko's pure red, pure yellow and pure blue. They're also based on more other modern influences, the Olympic Stadium going up in my backyard in 2011. And I just wanted to kind of finish with saying I felt that the gallery space is an alternative to a narrative-driven press photography and the pressure of commercial sales. The images are slowed down, room for contemplation. We're conditioned to seeing photographs of sportsmen and women and reading them literally as a document of a particular individual and event. And by giving my photographs a different context, and by combining sculptural form and image, I suggest a way for the viewer to consider the work, a different way. There's a certain dynamic and physical presence that a sculptural work can bring to a space, which I hope will invite a more open interpretation. Although I photographed world-class athletes representing superpowers and present them as unnamed individuals, my emphasis on the individual as part of a larger social and political structure sits at odds with the collectivist approach of the constructivists. And despite all my historical references, I'm not interested in nostalgia. In making this work, I hope to define a contemporary moment in gymnastics and in photography. A fuller exploration of how ideas of perfection have shaped photography and lens-based media, and how photography has contributed to ideas of perfection, is going to be published in August by Intellect and University of Chicago Press. I'm just going to leave you with my latest work, Cross, made in Canada. In fact, 5 years in the making. This was the only piece I knew when I started at Heathrow I wanted to make. But the British coaches considered it not feminine and suggested I do something else. this is a large-scale work, life-size, pictured in a female gymnast in an iconic move on the rings, an apparatus which showcases strength and control, but which is used solely by men in competition. And I should just credit all the many people who've helped fund this work. I had a Leverhulme Fellowship at University of Wales, Newport. Other spaces also had financial support from Pavilion, the National and Media Museum, Arts Council England, Arts Council Wales, the John Coble Foundation, and the Art Gallery of Ontario. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Would anybody like to ask a question? Well, I'll start it off with a quick question. Or how are we doing now?
We have 5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes. I'll take that one. It was very, and you've been very patient. We knew me and Joe right before lunch. You wouldn't leave. You'd stay watching. You have a very interesting way of understanding time and sequence in your work. And this latest work that you've been showing us, I think it's rethinking of how a sequence is established. And I wanted to know if, like, when you were showing the difference between Muybridge's work and how you were, let's say, you were expanding the dot. So
Yeah.
instead of it being, like so,
Yeah.
it was over 10 years. In doing so, you were able to come up with political landscapes, what in cultural landscapes and so on. It seems like you're doing something where you're doing almost like a double helix between Muybridge now and what you were doing with this other work in this kind of thing, where you're looking at each, moment, and then, I don't know, not isolating the moment, but putting it against other aspects of the work. Is that?
You're saying like I think I saw the A to Z as like a kind of a real starting point. It's kind of my understanding my territory and what it was that interested me, but also how other people choose to film and photograph a particular thing. And then from that I drew out things that I think, but why, or I want to show, or no one, I think the experience being at the World Championships, having hired a camera and lenses that were kind of almost identical to the press photographers, and I was in the same pens, and thinking, well, what is it I want to show? Because they have commercial-driven needs to produce certain things that will sell, but it was my opportunity to say, how am I going to do this differently? Actually, I'm using the same tool. So why would I do that differently? So in some cases it was about selecting particular things. I mean, this isn't photographic truth per se, because women don't do this, but obviously it's a photograph of someone doing that. But there were things I wanted to highlight, if subtly, but there were other things like bringing the battered legs together. There's something I wanted it to be kind of like that kind of physical kind of pinnacle, all these amazing world-class gymnasts, but also to kind of show the human experience and kind of the reality of what goes on in that process. So, yeah, different strategies for making the work are all to do with wanting people to stop for different amounts of time or to look. So, like Pinnacle is kind of a large piece, and it's hung low to the floor, and you look up to it. And because it is large like that, and because it's beautifully framed, they're really crappy little images that I've selected. But then people, because it's in a certain frame, will look in a certain way. And so it kind of like, to start with, they probably wouldn't see those things. But if it had just been a kind of small selection of images, it probably would have not had the same impact. So, yeah, to try and slow things down sometimes.
I just had a little addendum to that, which I thought about while you were speaking, which is that up to now, almost all papers, in one way or another, have commented about the non-representational aspect of an image. Now, the images you're showing are many things, but one thing they also are, or they could be claimed to be, is representational. Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I suppose depends how you think about representation. I mean, obviously I'm interested in portraiture and bodies and the physicality, but I'm also interested in experience and emotion. So if you think of suspension, when you're in that room, close up, I mean, it's a large piece. Again, you look up to it, you just get these kind of large, colourful dots. But you're really aware of the physicality of that woman floating above you because she's so big. And that's kind of important. But at the same time, you know, if you were there in gym, it would look nothing like that. So, and then other ones that maybe are more, you know, you would be, as Friedrich described, you'd look at this and look through the photograph and see, you know, you talk about the gymnast, not the photograph of the gymnast. But actually, that photograph wouldn't exist. I borrowed a really hugely expensive camera from the AGO to make this, and you know, there was some work involved. So you would never see this either, even though you may just look at it and think it's a photograph of a young woman hanging, you know, in a cross in the ring. So. Yes,
just to add a comment to that, I'm not quite sure how transparent the images are in that sense. One of the things listening to you talk seemed to be was sort of common in all your works was ideas around skilled vision, really. I mean, there was the A to Z piece really was an explication of the skilled vision of sports, of gymnastic photographers, and then you've taken that and played with that. That seems to be also equally true of NASA photographs.
Yeah,
so
it's true.
Interesting.
I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's a nice way to think. I'm really, you know, what really interests me when I work with people is this kind of slightly obsessive behaviour, which obviously gymnasts need to have because they have to stick at it for years and train. And I guess NASA scientists are the same. And I guess photographers to some degree, you know, however, you know, you may just pick up a camera and just press the shutter, but it doesn't really happen like that. And, you know, however, whether you're really technical or not, you still have to have a certain obsession and understand what equipment you might want to use, even if you're using something very low. I mean, I have a piece I haven't shown, which I made by making a photostat of some perfect solids and then snapping on my snappy and then just printing out on my inkjet. And it hangs with blocks of gymnast chalk. And it works very nicely. So for me, you know, camera's a tool, you just pick what's needed, but you need the passion to kind of be excited about wanting to find something that might be right for it. So, yeah.
Which is a great note. Oh.
Can I just finish, though, on saying that it's really important for me that you can come into a gallery and have no knowledge of art or photography or anything. I try and make my work so it's there for everyone to just get something from him at whatever level. It's not about the specialist viewer. So.
But as you say, the specialist viewer will perhaps be discontented, or some of them are discontented.
I imagine some specialist photography viewers would be very...
well, only photographers, I think he was a gymnast, for professional reasons.
Yes, and certainly when I was working with dogs, there was the classic 12 Dogs, 12 Bitches was my first piece, which was a classic grid of, you know, showing dogs. I showed one from it at the beginning. Shot in the studio, you know, perfect lighting, immaculate printing. The dog breeders walked in and were horrified to see I'd posed all the dogs facing the wrong way. So I was showing a side of the dogs to the judge that a judge wouldn't normally see. And another breeder who was wonderful and I'd worked really well with brought me a present of a bottle of wine and a little book. And I opened the book and it was How to Photograph Dogs. And I'd already given her copies of all my photographs of her dogs. I'm thinking, and it was it wasn't it was a generous gift. So there are lots of different ways of, but I think even photographers may come in and say, well, you really shouldn't be doing that. So.